Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunuktu, saha viryam karavavahai, tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illuminating, and may we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Okay, fire away.
Yes, so I was actually just today, I was speaking with my manager and she said about an exercise of Hatha Yoga. And then suddenly it came to my mind when you said that in a situation you were given an exercise of Hatha Yoga. And then I arrived home and then I remembered that and I said, actually my yoga teacher is going to go on holiday for a month in December. So I said, let me search positions of Hatha Yoga. And then suddenly I popped into an image that I know you said you didn't like to speak about them because they are a bit confusing about chakras and stuff. But then suddenly this picture was showing something called Bindu points that said is in between the eyebrows and the crown. And then I read a little bit more about it because I never heard. And then I also saw that they call, I think it's the mind or the head, the moon center. And I think it's the navel, the sun center. And then I kept kind of researching and searching. And then I found also some information that said some people, when they take vows of celibacy or they practice chastity, or I think Sri Ramakrishna calls it brahmacharya, which he says when you practice, but if there's no brahmacharya, it's kind of like you miss it, you then lose it. So my question is, what is this Bindu point? What does it have to do with this moon and sun center? And when someone takes this vow of celibacy or does this chastity, brahmacharya, whatever you want to call it, I mean, how all of this is related to?
I have no idea. So you see, when we pick up a subject, we should always try to get to an original text. And if we take original texts on Hatha Yoga, well, they're not so original. There are yoga Upanishads. I don't know how old they are, but whether they're there or whether it is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika of a later era or the Giranda Samhita, Conversations with Shiva, the main idea is that the main idea really is that these postures are there for meditation purposes mainly. There's one Yoga Upanishad, and it will have about 8 postures described. Only 2 of them are really to do with physical health. One is Mayurasana, that is peacock posture. And the other one is one which is stretching the shoulder joints, and the rest will all be aimed at meditation postures. Vajrasana, Siddhasana, Padmasana, Ardha Padmasana, and so on. And so why should any asanas or exercises take place in the beginning? And is there a chance that by emphasizing yoga asanas that is described in Hatha Yoga, that we become body conscious rather than God conscious? This is the concern. So to protect that, Patanjali, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the philosophy of meditation, since these postures are orientated toward meditation postures, will give us a set of universal morals, a set of universal observances, with the idea that we should prepare for this internal journey. We should prepare for going inward to take the mystic journey inside. And what are some of those preparations? Purification of body and mind would be one. This is contained in the 5 niyamas. 5 are yamas, 5 niyamas. There will be some more, but basically that's the basic idea. So what should we do to purify the body? Well, we have to, first of all, revalue the body, not as mine, my body, or my mind. We have to shift that a little bit, and we have to say the Lord's temple, or the Lord's city, or the Lord's housing, not mine. And then what about the mind? Well, it's the divine sitting room where the Lord sits. It's the inner chamber. It's the throne room. It's the Lord's sitting room. And how do we purify this body? We purify it, obviously, through hygienic practices that only really have been re-emphasized in many countries and many societies due to COVID. Because COVID has told us to behave hygienically as we should always have behaved. Because, of course, there will be various attacks from germs and what have you from the outside. So we have to bathe the body and keep it clean, free of bacteria and dirt. When we bathe, we're actually rejuvenating our mental frame as well. We're feeling much better. We feel much more alert. That's the effect that the bodily cleansing has on the mind. And then how do we clean the mind? Well, we clean the mind, or we clean the internal body, I should tell you, through yogasanas, through diet, through right thinking, through various means. In other words, thinking healthily, living healthily, well-being is what we're centered on. Not because we're body orientated, but because the body is a temple and we have to clean it. Not only is it a temple, we can also regard it as a suitable instrument. For what? For what purpose? For an inner journey that culminates in conditions that make realization possible by itself. Revelation happening by itself. So the purpose of any of these yogasanas will be to move the lymphatic system around in such a way, systematically exercising the body, so that it now is happy to sit for meditation. That then makes us more spiritual conscious and takes us away from physical emphasis and makes us body conscious. Body consciousness is simply saying, I'm the body. And because I'm the body, I have to do something with it and for it. Now, according to the yogis, within the body, there is a polarity. The body has a magnetic field. And the evidence of the magnetic field can easily be demonstrated. And so the yogis noticed that one side of the body was positive and one side was negative, and that there were currents running through the body in the subtle body, understanding that the body is comprised of not one thing, but various things. What we call the visible body is actually made from yesterday's bananas and milk, yesterday's food. So converted naturally, and it's a wonder that it's converted by a loving entity that digests our food free of charge, without going on strike. Infallibly does it, never failing. Not even worrying whether we thank it or not. And then inside that, within it, a subtle body that is made from pure energy. So the body made from matter has a subtle component which is called energy, and that energy is divided fivefold, and it actually affects the gross body through various currents. These currents are called nadis, not exactly nerves, but they would certainly come out in the gross way as nerves, but they're subtle. And according to the yogi is interested primarily in 3 of these current channels. One is called Ida, the other one is called Pingala, and one is represented by moon and one is represented by sun. And hatha is often interpreted as a transition between moon and sun and moon, a balance between these two. And so part of the yoga exercise would be, if the nerves are in any way upset, then how do you calm them so that they won't bother you and things will become conducive for meditation? So a very systematic science of breathing techniques is recommended. And why? Because prana is everywhere. It's not just in the lungs, but the obvious manifestation of it is the movement of the diaphragm up and down, resulting in the inflation and deflation of the lungs. And the movement of it is prana, and the control of it is pranayama. Yama meaning control. So that we can control these currents in such a way that our magnetic field operates well. Now, the magnetic field is an outgoing thing. And what we want to do is we want to try and take all that energy and we want to recharge it. We want to redirect it through the third channel. And we want to take it from Ida and Pingala and consolidate it. And the yogis say this is centered in Muladhara, the root, concentrated root. And from there it has a chance of reformulating itself and being much more direct, like a laser, and having the capacity to unfold every single layer and level of the mind, progressively, bit by bit. So sun often represents day, of course, represents the positive aspect of things. And the moon represents the negative aspect of things. And of course, when we talk about the moon, la lune is what it is in French. And when your mind is upset, we call it lunacy, because we understand that the moon has an effect on the mind, because an effect on the moods, and the waxing and waning of the moon will also affect the tides, the afferent and efferent currents of the tides, and in turn the weather and all of that. Then, of course, when the moon is bright, studies have shown that people's mood changes. I know that in Zimbabwe, when it was Rhodesia, when we were involved in a war, the most dangerous time was the full moon. Somehow it encouraged people to be much more active, and also more crime took place during that period. Probably just for an obvious reason, there was more light. But an analysis of sun and moon and fire and all of these things that give us light, beautiful example is given in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, a conversation with Yajnavalkya. What is that light by which we work and move and sit and all of the activities that we do, that we work and walk and so on and so forth? What is the light that enables us to do this? And the answer from the wise Yajnavalkya is, oh, that's easy. The sun, naturally. The sun is the one that gives us light in every sense of the word. Not only gives us light to see, but also gives us energy, solar energy. And the moon is a reflection. Now, why would the moon be a symbol of the mind? Or the mind, what is the mutual association? What in Vedic times is called Soma. Soma is the moon. Soma, when we drink in the rays of the moon, then it calms the mind, and we're able now to have some deep insight. It's because the mind or the intellect is simply a reflection of the real entity, the real self that sits inside, and a symbol of that might well be the sun. And one of the meditations that is prescribed, say by Patanjali, is, okay, so you have many alternate themes for meditation to steer your attention toward. For example, you can meditate on the sound symbol Om, or you can imagine that there's an effulgent light within, or you can imagine the heart, the sentiment, if you will, of a great saint or sage, or anything from dream, or anything that your creative imagination can conjure up, and will be delightful enough to lead you progressively to your own center. So there are all these various options that are given to guide the mind. The sun is always a symbol of knowledge. And so if you want to say that the ajna, that is the symbol, the center of consciousness, symbolically will be in the region opposite the pituitary gland, and another may be opposite the pineal gland for various obvious reasons. These are the various monarchs of our endocrine system. Then we can imagine, of course, okay, then the moon can be there. Yes. Now, what is this bindu then? Well, bindu means a point. And of course, if we are concentrating here, we'll imagine that there's a bindu, and very often a bindu is put, a point is given here. And then you can concentrate on that. But that is only really suitable for non-dualistic meditation, formless meditation. For the devotee, the center is better in the heart. So what is a bindu? A bindu, a point, has no dimensions. You can't measure its length. A point is a point. A number of points joined will make a line. Number of points with no gap, this makes a line. But a point by itself, we can't really describe it mathematically, we can't describe it pictorially, we can't describe it in terms of dimensions. And so the term point is very useful. And in cosmology, we're asked to believe that that point is called a singularity. That is, when bodies are moving progressively out, and we notice the difference in the light that gets refracted back from the outer corners of the universe, some 15 billion light years away, say, then we get this red shifted. In other words, the wavelength lengthens and moves into the red part of the visible spectrum. And we know that this is moving away, and we can measure distance versus velocity. And we realize, oh, something is expanding. Things are moving away from us. So therefore, if we are to trace the origin, we have to run this movie backwards. We make it go backwards. And of course, logically, when you make it go backwards, time and space itself disappears, and you're left almost with a nothing. But that something originating is called singularity. And that is subject to speculation, how and why that could arise. But you can't say what happened before, because time itself originates at that single point, according to modern cosmologists. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with them. I'm simply saying this is the way they think. When we now concentrate and we draw all the lines of our attention, our scattered mind, inwards, and draw it all inwards to one point, this is called ekagra, one-pointedness. We want one-pointedness in all our activities, that is, the mind associated with all our activities. We want one-pointedness in our energy distribution, one-pointedness as much as possible in that energy distribution that is called thought. And it's called psychic prana. And so, yes, we can concentrate on a point, there's no doubt. That is a bindu. One of the most wonderful graphic examples of things moving out and moving in, a kind of expansion, and also the opposite of that, a kind of breathing in and breathing out, we can elevate it on a cosmological basis, would be what is called the Sri Chakra. That is a diagram, if you will, with interlocking triangles, over 40 of them, all intricately interwoven, giving us an idea that we can move, as it were, from the representation of the circle of it, even beyond that, and move progressively inward to all this complexity of triangles, and then ultimately get to an inner space, and in that space is bindu, a point. A bindu simply means a point, and it's useful for meditation purposes, there's no doubt. For example, supposing we imagine now that in the center of the chest there is a lotus flower deep, deep inside, beyond the layers of the body, beyond the layers of what we call mind, and beyond the intellect itself, that shining, revealing factor, and beyond the sense of I, beyond a position of blissful awareness. There, in the middle of all of that, we can imagine a lotus flower opening. Let us say it has 8 petals. But then in the center of that, we can imagine the central feature, the object of our meditation. And within that also, we can imagine a point, a bindu, point of light, let us say. You can see how progressively we have drawn our attention from all the multiplicity in the outside world, progressively to more subtle areas, finally to a space, if you will, that we can imaginatively create. And within that, we get more and more of the subtlety. And then as we're doing that, we ourselves can be moving deep down. We can sink down deep into the depths of our own being with each progressive movement. This is called meditation. So the idea of having any kind of point will be to represent the single one-pointedness of the mind. That's where we want to be. And we have to do it in such a way that we don't misunderstand it for an annihilation of everything and dullness and boredom, because then sleep, of course, will set in. And that's not the object of meditation. So I hope I've answered your question, brief as it was.
So, Swami, so is there not, like, because when they describe it on the pictures, it's like it was another chakra in the middle of that. Like it was saying, for example, that with headstands, I can see your smile, Swami is making me smile. Now with headstands, I said, no, Swami, I just saw this and I just knew I need to know what is this, because I never saw it before. And what he was saying basically was like a description in the picture. It was like from the sun center, basically with this vow of celibacy or chastity, it's like this point drops and then they were like kind of avoiding the drop. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I thought I really need to know about this.
Yes, okay. So I, of course, as you know, and that's how I first met you, address many yoga groups. And when you ask some of their concepts, you come across many, many different things. When you ask them for the source of it, they're hard pressed. They might say, oh, I found it in Easton's bookshop or whatever it was, okay? And picked up a book with no bibliography, but all wonderful diagrams and so on. And again, I reiterate, whenever we study anything, we should go to the original texts. Let us take, for example, the subject of chakras. The whole concept, the yoga concept, comes from the tantric system, and therefore the tantras, this is a text series of scriptural texts. There are 64 of them. These are also called agamas. And do we learn Sanskrit? Do we learn to read these representational texts? That these texts are put in a kind of code language, a kind of esoteric language. The purpose of esotericism is to protect the teaching from an external conqueror or something of that nature. In this case, this was the case in India. And so you represent everything you previously had externally, you put internally now, so that the body itself becomes a replication of the entire cosmos. Instead of having a a temple which has 7 courtyards in it. You have the body, and you make that 7 inside, and you make it like a danda, like a rod, like a stick, or like a Mount Meru. And so the spine is there, and you then represent that initially as your progressive route to freedom, to liberation. And you use the full capacity of your imagination. But don't mistake imagination for reality. So I don't know about the headstand, except, of course, I do it. But the one thing I should say, it's excellent to do it, because then we see the world in its true perspective, upside down. The world is topsy-turvy. Much better to see it standing on your head. But the physiological benefit of it is there, no doubt. And is there some spiritual benefit or advantage? Is there some kind of mystic exercise? No, except it prepares the way. All of these are ways of preparing, ultimately, a certain condition of calmness where revelation takes place by itself. It's a system of cleaning. And the Shirsasana, as it's called, headstand, will be an extremely effective way, because all the blood is rushing, it's going to the extreme areas. It's an aerobic exercise. That means the blood, the heart has to pump harder, because it now has to pump toward the feet. And all the vital organs of the body, to do with your thought and vitality, to do with the eyes and ears and all of those sensitive areas, will all be flushed with fresh blood. So you are stimulating that. The organs, digestive organs, are all hanging upside down. You're giving them a stimulus as well. Any inverted posture will do this. We have Sarvangasana, complete limb posture, which will do the same, with the added benefit that you're squeezing here the thyroid and parathyroid glands, and they release a drop, tiny small drop of fluid that assists in the metabolism. In fact, it's largely responsible for healthy metabolism. The hypothalamus, all of that gets a stimulation from these inverted postures. And it's very good to stand on your head. It's not so good to stand on somebody else's head, just remember. But what has that to do with any kind of inner mystic experience? Nothing whatsoever, except that any experience is preceded by a gathering of thought and projecting it in a highly positive, virtuous way, embracing all the higher values that are available of truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony. And we are using these words because every time we use a word like this, an internal resonance occurs. Every organ, every sense, every cell of the body picks up that theme and vibrates well with it. And you cannot, because the body is a magnetic field, you cannot stop that from the outside world. And so you're benefiting your environment. Why is it that these saints walk around in art universally? You know, there's a saint. How do you know it? There's a halo around his head, something like the sun. His face is beaming like the sun. There's something shining from his body or her body. And so this is the artist's representation of the magnetic field shining with spirit, pure spirit. And the nature of that spirit is love. And the mark of a holy person is the love that is emanating from them. And it's not a kind of inferior love. It's not a genetic love. It's a universal love for all beings. It is not reserved in any way, and it is spread equally everywhere, and everybody benefits, just like the sun. The sun is no respecter of people, doesn't matter, doesn't judge whether you robbed a bank or whether you wrote a scholarly text and poetry, doesn't care. Its rays get distributed everywhere to everyone, regardless, from an ant to a bee, to a flower, to a fern, reflecting on the water. And it's because of the heat of the sun that the drama of rainfall occurs, by this heat evaporating water from the oceans in vast quantities, assembling and condensing as clouds, or evaporating as clouds, I should say, condensing as rainfall. And so a wonderful cycle occurs. And that itself can be a subject for meditation. And those kinds of things will create such a high radiation of mind that undoubtedly, where we find this radiation coming from is what we can call blissful base. So let us establish, where is our blissful base? Go inwards. Now sometimes, very often, books, diagrams, etc., that give all of these kinds of things. For example, I have a book in front of me, and there you see all the patterns of nadis described from the old texts. Supposing you are able to trace all of that and identify where all of these are coming from and trace them all and getting all engrossed in that, unfortunately, you've missed something important. What is it? The source of that energy that is flowing. And that source is only one. And when you find it, it has no form or shape or characteristics. You can't analyze it. You can't put it in a book. You can't put it in a test tube. You can't see whether it's alkaline or acid. None of these characteristics will apply. It is simply that simplest of entities. Some new atheists will argue, based on their own simplistic understanding of their own field of research, if you have something simple, then it must inherently be unintelligent. Why? The simplest thing you can find is a rock. In fact, I can go even further. Iron. Iron is the stupidest thing in the universe. It doesn't move anything. It doesn't react. It doesn't go anywhere. It's heavy. But you see, that iron is made from iron molecules. And that those molecules will have atoms, and those atoms will have atomic fields. And it's a hive of activity at the very smallest microscopic level. You can't get away from it. So a zoologist or a biologist or an evolutionary biologist will naturally think in biological terms. A chemist will think in chemist terms. But the king of all the sciences will be physics. And when physics, because even biology and botany and so on, that relies on the principles of physics. And what happens in physics will be reflected in all these other disciplines, because the standard model which people are using to describe the fundamentals of this physical universe will be the same regardless of its form and regardless of its qualities. Those simple components will be there. So there'll be 6 and 6, 12, 13, so 12, another 6, 16 forces will be there, so 18, 19, let's say 20. 20 fundamental forces will be there, including the latest, which is the Higgs boson. That's all that they have. And it doesn't matter if it's a rock or something else. But what's the difference? The difference is in the manifestation of spirit from within. That's the difference. So when we get back to the simplicity, it's not that it is just dull and unintelligent, because at the very simplest, it must be the whole source of pure intelligence. You can't get intelligence from non-intelligence. So it's simply pure logic that when something evolves and manifests and changes and arrives at a so-called intelligent man, so-called, we wonder because the behavior is there. So when that arrives, you can't get something that wasn't inherently there. You cannot get an oak tree if the oak tree in its entirety potentially wasn't there in the seed. It has to be there. And it simply unfolds. And my simplest example that I always and often give is to take a piece of paper, fold it up, hand it to somebody and say, please unfold this. And as they're unfolding it, you say, this is evolution. And when they've unfolded the thing completely, you say, what is the thing that was got by you that was new and fresh? Where was the variable or random mutation that took place in this? No, you deliberately, specifically, 1 square inch at a time unfolded this piece of paper until you couldn't do it anymore, and there you have the totality. And the problem is we don't see the totality. So as soon as we get diverted for one reason or other, he said this, she said that, it's found in this book, it's found in that book. If it's found in a book, try to trace back what is its original source. And if it has anything to do with esoteric tantrism, please, your original source should be the 64 tantras, all written in code language, as it were, in representative pictorial language. Go back to that, but who's prepared to study all that? When somebody says about all these things, I say, well, did you read the 64 tantras? Oh, what are those? Oh, where's your authority? Oh, some book I picked up at the bookstore. Does it have a bibliography? No. Oh, sorry about that. Go and look for another book, please. And the greatest authority in all of these things would have been an author that wrote under the pen name Arthur Avalon. Sir John Woodruff was a High Court judge, and he took the time to get initiated in the Tantric system. And all of his books that I have read anyway dedicate the introduction, long introductions, pointing out very politely that the New Age people of his day, that were called Theosophists, have their interpretation. He was being polite. And then the Eastern interpretation is like this. Western interpretation like this, Eastern interpretation like that. Generally speaking, the Western interpretation is orientated toward the physical. And generally speaking, the Eastern interpretation is orientated toward the spiritual. May we have both, of course. So this one energy that we have is an urge for freedom, an urge for perfection, and is already unfolding within us, but is being diverted by our attention here and there. When we bother to gather it in, it's called pratyahara, and push it systematically in a certain direction, inwardly, then we are revealing what is already there. Consciousness that is flowing through, that is our birthright, is gathered up and withdrawn from the objects of the world that are causing us a lot of trouble. Now, these objects are anything that is seen and heard and touched and tasted and so on. And it can be in the form of a person, it can be in the form of an event, it can be in the form of a scene. All of these things, anything that presents itself in front of us as our environment, a kind of scenario where we put ourselves in a corner and have to react to what flows toward us. Now the yogi turns it around and says, let me put myself in a commanding position. Let me take myself out of the restricted sphere of operation that I'm used to, my world, my small little well. And let me stand independently in my full glory as a witness, knower, thinker in one, and beam goodness there toward the field. So this technically is called, this relationship is technically called the knower and the field. This is contained in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita with that very title, Kshetra Kshetrajna. This is the field and the knower of the field. And all the field we come to think of is infused with the knower. We start off with a separation because every experience has to have these two things. It has to have the field of knowledge, what is observed, and it has to have the thing that is observing it. And the process of knowledge is called epistemology. And that epistemological process, that is the science of knowledge, that can be summarized as having these three dimensions. Well, one is an intermediate process to get you from one to the other and back again. Well, instead of following that pattern, why don't you stand where the knower is? Because when you ask, What is the knower? Who is the knower? It is that which stands and knows. There's nothing more you can say about it. You can't go further. If you have to go further, you have to go to another step where there's a knower who knows the subsidiary knower, and so it goes on. So you have to draw the database somewhere. You draw the line. And there the knower stands. Now, when there's no field, we can't call the knower a knower. When the field goes and disappears, then the only thing which is there is existence itself. There's no other object to know. You can't carry on saying a witness is a witness when there's nothing to witness. So when this entity stands in its pristine glory, when all other things disappear, then all our labels with regard to it have to disappear with it. But we are so caught up in the ephemeral world and then get diverted. Our curiosity wants to know what is this, what is that, but our first port of call is it warranted? Number one. And number two, is it a diversion from the central theme of our life? We always have to constantly ask ourselves, is this going to contribute toward my inherent freedom, or is it going to block it? And if it blocks it, we avoid it. And if it assists us to flow toward, to glide toward our inherent destiny, we take it.
Swami, I've got a question. So then, like Sri Ramakrishna said, then if we say those points are there to help, I mean, just, as meditation and all of this, is it brahmacharya really necessary to self-realization?
Yes. Because you see, what is brahmacharya? It's control of the senses. It's misunderstood. The correct interpretation should be chastity, that is purity. Purity of thought, purity of word, purity of intention, purity of action. All of this is called brahmacharya. Originally, it was applied in the sense of studenthood. Like many Sanskrit terms, it has many meanings, interwoven meanings, which serve to enforce the original meaning. All right. So, in the social structure of the ancient days, life was supposed to be 100-fold duration, and you can divide that into 4 sections of 25 years each. First 25 years of your life would be what is called brahmacharya, that is studenthood. And that studenthood then requires character building, self-constraint, moral training, duties, all of those kinds of things. Not only that, but also academic learning. All of it comes under the same heading. See, what use is academic learning if there's no good citizenship that goes along with it? You go out into the world after your secondary and tertiary education, and you haven't got a principal solid background that is called dharma. So for the first 25 years, you study like that. First 12, probably in your home. And then from the age of about 12, let's say to 25, those number of years, another 12 years or so, you then study under a teacher in a forest hermitage somewhere. And much of it would be serving the teacher and his wife. That phase is gone, and there are, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, you'd find very clear instructions for departing students. Please keep up the principle of truth. Please do your duty conscientiously. Please continue with this learning. All of these instructions are given. Please have compassion. Don't lapse in what you have learned. Don't forget what you've learned. All these kind of practical instructions will be there for students to help them in their next phase of life. The next phase of life would be to go into householder life. So a woman marries a man marries a woman, you have children, and when they come of age, you then, at a certain age, let's say 12, they also go for education. And only in that phase of life will you find that society is divided into caste. You slip into your social duty, and you live the household life, and your aim is not dharma. Dharma is your building block, your base. Dharma means any behavior or any action, even a thought, which constitutes or contributes toward a knitting together, a holding together, a binding. And you can see how it can be broadly applied in every context. Because when it comes out as interpreted as religion or law, yes, it has all that characteristic. It is a binding element. And then the next aim of life in household is artha, wealth creation. I was talking to somebody this evening, and they were saying, of course, their history, they struggled to get a job. They had a very poorly paid job. They were in a certain profession that didn't pay so well. And then, they managed, for a long time, they didn't have a job. And then ultimately they became very successful and they became indispensable to the job that they were in. Now they're complaining a little bit. Oh, I'm so overloaded with work. Well, it's better than not having a job. But you see, I often wonder, he says, that all this wealth, what's the good of it? Well, the good of it is you have a family. That's the good of it. And you have to be a breadwinner. But you probably are brought up with a culture that money is not good. Yes, he says. Well, wealth and money is good. It's a resource. That's why Hindus have Lakshmi, a deity, because it's the divine expressed in the form of wealth and abundance. Everybody should have it. May everybody have it. May everybody in the world have it. May those in Africa have it. May those in South America have it. May those in Asia have it. May everybody have it. And may there be none who do not have it. Let us pray for that, yes. That everybody have it means it includes me, all-inclusive formula. And then from 50 years of age to the next 25 years, 75 years of age, you then go in vanaprastha, you go to the forest hermitage with your wife, and your aim then will be karma. Karma means fulfilling your legitimate desires, because everything is based on the original dharma. You can see a building block. The basis is dharma. That has to be solid. The next will be artha, wealth creation. You won't do anything dishonest. You won't cheat another person because you have this basis, dharma. And then on top of that, you have to fulfill your unfulfilled legitimate desires that will be beneficial, not self-centered. And then the next phase of your life, last phase of your life, what is called sannyas, you then go with a begging bowl, you and your wife part ways. And by the way, in vanaprastha, you teach the students, you're also now in the forest, you're a forest dweller, sharing your knowledge and experience. And then you go from house to house in your final stage, and society are obliged to feed you, and you have a rule that, except when it's the rainy season, you will go from village to village or town to town and house to house. You will not stay more than 3 days in one place. You will not be a burden to any particular house. But on the other side, every householder will have the duty of supporting this person, because your aim is moksha then. And that is very different from the other three. Moksha is freedom. It is devoid of any materialism. Now you might say, if that's the structure of society, then how is it that some people get born and have a desire to be a monk or something? Well, they must have died in a previous life and left off there and are carrying on in the next life. So that's the idea about it. So brahmacharya happens in the first phase because one of the most fundamental principles would be that. And when we talk about the 5 moral precepts, what are we talking about? Ahimsa, non-injury. We're talking about truthfulness. We're talking about non-stealing. We're talking about cultivating independence, but we're cultivating self-control. Self-control has to be there. Now, without that self-control, and that's chastity, not celibacy. That's sometimes misunderstood as celibacy. Yes, for monks it will be celibate, that kind of thing. But for others, it is chastity, purity of intention. Because every person will have a mother and father. But the next thing in this purification will be these niyamas that I mentioned, 5 of them also. And that will be cultivating a sense of contentment, there will be purification of body and mind, and that will be a certain level of more intensive mortification, which really means intensifying the strength of your will. And along with that will be study, and study will include the repetition of mantra, japa, practice of that, a certain discipline of the mind, therefore. And finally, what will you do with your hands? You will offer the fruits of all your activities up to the Lord of these activities, that is called in the yogic system Ishvara. A kind of peculiar, not an extra cosmic creator God, but some principle that is responsible for the rhythm and balance within the universe, what we call generally life. So this is where brahmacharya comes in. Now, supposing you don't have that, supposing you do everything else except that, then none of the rest will work. And pranayama will not work. Pranayama will be downright dangerous because it requires the guidance of a teacher. And because it affects the nervous system directly, then without this brahmacharya, doing all of this highly technical experimentation in some cases, or in some cases carrying out even what books prescribe in terms of controlling prana through regulating the breath. In Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda gives us a very clear idea. Why should we control the movement of the lungs? He says it's like the flywheel of energy. Well, because, and he compares it, he tells a story about it. There's somebody who is captured in a castle and only has a window there, and is at the top of a big tower. You can imagine some of the tall towers in ancient Irish monasteries. And so how to get up there? So you take a beetle and you tie a thread with honey, and you then set it on a wall facing upwards, and the beetle will naturally follow the smell, as it were, of the honey and reach the upper window where a person is captured. The person will take the thread and lower the thread, and with that thread, the person at the bottom will tie it around a string, and the person at the top will draw the string up. And then you put that down again, and that will be attached to a rope, and then the rope will be drawn up, and with that rope, the person will tie it to something and climb down happily. But you see, the thread was the flywheel. And so it requires that. That is the purpose of pranayama. And it's not necessarily breathing, because it is control of prana. You can do it through love of God also. You can do it through many other things. It is only a practice that will say, please remove a certain disturbance if it is there. And we know the effects of a lack of concentration, shaking, for example, a sense of grief, sense of distraction, irregular breathing. Well, we deal with that through establishing regular breathing. Anybody who has a panic attack, you know, the first thing you ask them to do, whoa, wait, slow down. And sometimes you get them to breathe into a paper bag if they're hyperventilating. And then you say, okay, steady the breath now, come on. Proverbially count to 10, that's it. All right, calm down. And if you know the yogic kind of breathing, you get them to do some abdominal breathing, and then you get them to do some regular breathing where the breath is held in or is inhaled with no pretension and simply let out. A simple breathing, calm breathing process is encouraged. All right, now the nervous system is a little bit better. Fine. Now your attention, where is it? That capacity of the mind to to direct a kind of probe called attention that will either distract you or will enable a one-pointedness within you. What will you do with that? Well, you'll make it, you'll steer it as you want, guide it as you want. One beautiful technique is to guide that awareness to different parts of the body. Immediately, calmness of mind occurs. So the breathing part of it is plan B, not plan A, and it's used in emergencies. It's not used as a primary thing. Of course, you can do it, but there are only three simple breathing exercises prescribed in Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, and the more complex ones, he's advising his Sikha teacher. Now, I have first-hand experience of somebody who never practiced this properly and got migraines every time they tried to meditate. And when I asked them, what is your system of meditation? They said, oh, well, I do this pranayama and so on. And they say, and what is your lifestyle? Oh, I'm a liberal-minded person. I live my life to the full, and you can fill that in with your own imagination. So that's what I have to say on that.
I do actually have another question. I remember you said that, do you remember we were talking about Breath of Fire? You said that was really bad. I mean, my yoga teacher, she says it's really good for like immune system and so on, especially in winter. And I found by experience, I mean, because now every time I breathe, you come to my mind. So I'm thinking of you. I realize sometimes in yoga practice.
I'm glad I can be a breath of fresh air.
Yes, yes, you are, Swamiji. Sometimes it's fine, like it's good. And sometimes, depending on the yoga practice, even though, I'm calm and everything, I feel like my body reacts in a different way. And I mean, I was reading about yoga and everything. And I was wondering then, so is it bad then, the breathing, or is it good, like she says, or I'm a bit confused?
Well, breathing is good. I recommend it to everybody. But you see, I would be a little wary. The way to understand all of this, get hold of Raja Yoga, study this. It is, for me, it is a primary text, and follow the instructions on that. That's as simple as that. You see, there's a one passage I always remember, or a conversation I always remember from Swami Purnananda. And he says, you see, if you don't practice brahmacharya, don't do this pranayama, you'll upset your mind. And you see, because there are 8 limbs, you don't just go from nothing to pranayama. There's a process. You see, the point is 99.999% of your day is doing all kinds of activities. And during that period of time, unless your activities are done in the spirit of a game of guiding thought also, taking these 3 components, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and elevating the mind at every opportunity, seeing God everywhere and everything is the primary thing, and feeling the presence of that God everywhere at every moment. Now, if that is mastered, this is called yama. Because what is the basis of ahimsa, non-injury? Well, it's a negative term, but the opposite side of it is pure love. And how do you get pure love? By seeing the same thing equally present everywhere, within everything. And when you see that same entity everywhere, and you have to use your imagination very often with it, your creative imagination, and have a great deal of cultural fun with it, have have a degree of creativity within it. Because you see, the divine's company will be delightful company. And part of that will be japa. That is continuously repeating your mantra as a way of practicing the presence of the divine continuously. Until you see you don't have to say it inwardly, there's a kind of unconscious repetitive movement that comes with it automatically. So all of these are various techniques to control the mind in 99.999% of the day. That means when you sit for meditation, most of the difficulties are gone. That's the point. That is why the principle of yama is necessary and is necessary to practice. Yama and niyam are simply using practices in your normal everyday waking life. And unless that's steadied, unless you can control the senses and the mind, that's the first thing. And then that will give you then the capacity to meditate. From that, you'll get peace of mind. You can put it in any other combination you like. Because when you do, when you control the mind first, then you get peace of mind. When you get peace of mind, you can settle down and nothing much will disturb your meditation. That peace that you practice throughout the day will automatically filter through into your meditation. You'll do it very spontaneously and naturally. The mind will glide across the border of the waking state to that area which is like a dream, but instead of a dream is not planned. But meditation can be defined as a planned dream. The process is a planned dream. You construct a scenario. You take the mind and you guide it along a route that has been strewn with flowers and is canalizes your thought into inspiring ways until ultimately there's a culmination of it. And that culmination is one thought only in the mind, and that is called meditation. Even when that goes, it's called samadhi. Don't try and do it in one go, though.
Thank you, Swami. I think I literally, after all this video and everything, I've understood the 8 steps. After starting with all these videos that had nothing to do to now, literally, I just understood what was the issue.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace beyond all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami. Though it was late. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.